The crystal chandeliers of Bella Vista cast warm light across the white tablecloths as my family finished what had become their monthly ritual of public humiliation disguised as dinner. I sat quietly at the end of the table, cutting my salmon into precise pieces while my brother Marcus regaled everyone with stories of his latest promotion at the law firm. "Senior associate," he said for the third time, adjusting his Armani tie. "Youngest in the firm's history." My sister Victoria nodded approvingly, her diamond earrings catching the light. "That's what happens when you apply yourself. Unlike some people who waste their potential on pipe dreams." She didn't look at me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. I was Alexandra Chin, the family disappointment who dropped out of law school to pursue what they called restaurant fantasies. What they didn't know was that those fantasies had turned into a culinary empire worth $89 million. "Speaking of applying yourself," Dad said, setting down his wine glass with authority, "Alexandra, it's time we had a serious conversation about your future." I looked up from my plate. "What about it? This whole chef thing has gone on long enough. You're 28 years old, living in that cramped studio apartment, working in someone else's kitchen." His voice carried the familiar tone of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to. "Marcus has offered to get you an entry-level position at his firm. Paralegal work. It's honest employment." Mom nodded enthusiastically. "With benefits, dear. And room for advancement if you work hard." I glanced around the restaurant Bella Vista, one of the most exclusive establishments in the city. The same restaurant where I'd had my first job as a prep cook 8 years ago, washing dishes and learning from the ground up. The same restaurant whose struggling owner, Giuseppe Rossetti, had become like a father to me when my real family had written me off. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm happy where I am." Marcus snorted. "Happy? You're a line cook, Alex. You smell like grease half the time." "At least she's employed," Victoria added with false sweetness. "Though barely. How much do line cooks make these days? 30,000? 40 if you're lucky." I took a sip of water, letting their assumptions wash over me like they had for years. They had no idea that I owned 3 restaurants, had a cookbook deal with a major publisher, and that my catering company handled events for Fortune 500 companies. "The point is," Dad continued, "you're getting older. Soon you'll want to settle down, maybe start a family. You can't do that on a cook's salary." "Your father's right," Mom said gently. "We just want what's best for you, sweetheart. We want you to have security, stability. A real career. A real career." I almost laughed. Last month, Food and Wine magazine had featured me as one of the rising stars of American cuisine. My restaurants had waiting lists 3 months long. But to my family, I was still the girl who'd thrown away her law school scholarship to play with food. "I understand your concerns," I said, checking my watch. 8:47 p.m. Giuseppe would be finishing his rounds in the dining room soon, making his way to our table as planned. "Do you?" Marcus leaned forward. "Because from where I sit it looks like you're wasting your life. You could be making 6 figures as a lawyer. Instead you're chopping vegetables for minimum wage." "Marcus is right," Victoria said, pulling out her phone. "I was just looking at paralegal salaries online. Entry level starts at 55,000. That's probably more than you make in a year." The irony was suffocating. Last week I'd signed a deal to expand my restaurant group to the West Coast. The contract was worth $12 million. But here I sat, listening to my family calculate how I might scrape together a middle-class lifestyle if I abandoned everything I'd built. "You know what?" Mom suddenly announced, standing up from the table. "I think we've said everything we need to say tonight." Dad nodded, reaching for his wallet. "Sometimes tough love is necessary. We can't keep enabling this fantasy." "We're leaving," Mom declared, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Alexandra, it's time you figured things out for yourself. Find your own way home tonight. Maybe walking a few miles will give you time to think about your choices." Marcus was already standing, straightening his jacket. "This is for your own good, Alex. We can't keep coddling you." Victoria gathered her designer purse, shaking her head sadly. "When you're ready to grow up and join the real world, call us. Until then, we're done." I watched them put on their coats, the other diners staring at our table with a mixture of curiosity and pity. The humiliation was meant to break me, to force me into submission. Instead, I smiled and remained seated. "We're leaving without you," Mom announced one final time. "Find your own way home." Okay, I said simply. I'll figure something out. They walked toward the exit, heads held high, satisfied that they'd delivered the wake-up call I supposedly needed. As they disappeared through the front door, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text. They just left. Perfect timing. The response came immediately. On my way to your table now. I straightened my blazer. Not the discount store clothing my family assumed I wore, but a custom piece from a designer who'd become a personal friend after I'd catered her daughter's wedding. My cramped studio apartment was actually a converted loft in the arts district that I'd purchased and renovated myself. But appearances could be deceiving, and I'd learned to dress down whenever I knew I'd be seeing my family. Giuseppe Rossetti approached my table with his characteristic warm smile, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence that had helped him build his restaurant empire before age and health issues forced him to consider selling. He was wearing his best suit, and I noticed he'd brought a leather portfolio, the merger documents we'd been negotiating for months. "Alexandra, my dear," he said in his accented English, loud enough for the remaining diners to hear. "Thank you for staying. I hope your family's early departure won't interfere with our business discussion." I stood to greet him and he kissed both my cheeks in the traditional Italian fashion. "Not at all, Giuseppe. I'm ready to finalize everything." "Excellent." He gestured to the chair my father had vacated. "Hey, please sit." As Giuseppe settled into the chair, I noticed several diners at nearby tables watching us with interest. Bella Vista was the kind of place where business deals were often conducted, and Giuseppe was something of a local celebrity in culinary circles. "I must say," Giuseppe continued, opening his portfolio, "when you first approached me about acquiring my restaurant group, I was skeptical. You're so young and you presented yourself so modestly, but your track record speaks for itself." He pulled out the contracts, spreading them across the table where my family's dinner plates had been moments before. 3 successful restaurants, a James Beard nomination, and that catering contract with the mayor's office. Very impressive for someone barely 30. I smiled, remembering how Giuseppe had laughed when I'd first told him about my family's perception of my career. Age is just a number in this business. What matters is vision and execution. Precisely. He pulled out an expensive pen, the kind my father had always coveted. "Now let's review the terms one final time. You're acquiring Bella Vista, Rosa's Garden and Il Momento for a total of $42 million. With the option to retain all current staff and maintain the existing menus for at least 1 year. $42 million. I thought about my family, probably sitting in their car in the parking lot, discussing how they'd finally taught me a lesson about responsibility and realistic expectations. "That's correct," I confirmed, pulling out my own pen. "And you'll stay on as a consultant for the transition period?" 6 months, with the possibility of extension if we both agree. Giuseppe smiled. "I confess, I'm excited to see what you do with these establishments. Your innovation combined with our traditions, it's going to be something special." Just then I noticed movement near the restaurant's entrance. Through the large windows I could see my family's car in the parking lot. They hadn't left after all. Dad was gesturing animatedly, probably arguing with Mom about whether they'd been too harsh. Marcus was on his phone, likely calling an Uber since they'd originally planned to drop me off at home. Victoria was checking her makeup in the car's mirror. They were about to witness something that would shatter every assumption they'd made about my life. "Giuseppe," I said, raising my voice slightly, "before we sign, I want to make sure you're comfortable with my expansion plans. Adding Bella Vista to my restaurant group will bring my total holdings to 6 establishments across 3 cities." Giuseppe nodded approvingly. "Your vision for farm-to-table dining is exactly what the industry needs. And your financial backing is solid. Your accountant provided excellent documentation." I noticed a couple at the table next to us leaning in to listen. Word would spread quickly through the city's social circles. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the young woman who'd been publicly abandoned by her family at dinner was actually a major player in the restaurant industry. "Shall we make this official?" Giuseppe asked, positioning the contract between us. I glanced toward the window again. My family was still in the parking lot and I could see Dad walking back toward the restaurant entrance. Probably coming back to rescue me, to offer me a ride home in exchange for a promise to consider Marcus's job offer. Perfect timing. I signed my name with a flourish on the signature line, then handed the pen to Giuseppe. He signed with equal ceremony, then stood and extended his hand. Congratulations, Alexandra. You are now the owner of 4 of the city's finest restaurants. We shook hands just as Dad pushed through the front door, followed by the rest of my family. Their eyes went straight to our table, taking in the formal handshake, the spread of documents, and Giuseppe's deferential posture toward me. Thank you, Giuseppe, I said, making sure my voice carried across the dining room. I'm honored to be taking over such prestigious establishments. The 42 million is well invested. Dad stopped in his tracks. Mom bumped into him from behind. Marcus and Victoria stood frozen by the hostess station, their mouths slightly open. Giuseppe noticed my family's arrival and smiled knowingly. Ah, your family returns. Perhaps they'd like to join us for a celebratory drink. I looked toward the entrance where my family stood like deer caught in headlights. I'm not sure they have time. They were just explaining how disappointed they are in my life choices. Disappointed? Giuseppe's eyebrows rose in theatrical surprise. In one of the most successful young restaurateurs in the country? How curious. The hostess approached my parents uncertainly. Excuse me, do you need a table? No, Dad managed to say, his voice hoarse. We were just leaving. But he didn't move. None of them moved. They stood there, processing what they'd just witnessed, trying to reconcile the struggling line cook they'd abandoned at dinner with the woman who'd just purchased 4 restaurants for more money than they'd see in their lifetimes. Giuseppe began gathering the contracts. I should let you celebrate with your family. This is a big moment. Actually, I said loud enough for my parents to hear, I think I'll celebrate at one of my other restaurants. Il Giardino has excellent champagne, and the staff there will want to hear about the expansion. Giuseppe chuckled. Of course. Your staff at Il Giardino are like family to you, no? Much more supportive than. He glanced meaningfully toward my actual family. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. Giuseppe, you're absolutely right. Real family celebrates your successes instead of trying to tear them down. Dad finally found his voice. Alexandra. I turned toward him with a polite smile. Yes. Could we talk? I'm sorry, but you made it clear that you were done with me tonight. Something about finding my own way home and growing up. Mom stepped forward. Sweetheart, we didn't understand. Understand what? That I'm not actually a failure? That I haven't been wasting my life. I picked up my purse, a custom leather bag that had cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. You've been telling me for 8 years that I needed to abandon my dreams and get a real job. Well, congratulations. You finally convinced me that we have nothing to talk about. Victoria found her voice. Alex, we saw you sign papers for $42 million. Where did that money come from? I smiled sweetly. From my restaurants, Victoria. The ones I built while you were all telling me I was wasting my potential. Restaurants? Marcus stepped closer. You mean you own restaurants? 6 of them now, actually. Well, technically 5 restaurants and 1 catering company. The catering company handles most of the high-end events in the city, including, coincidentally, the mayor's inauguration next month. The color drained from Dad's face. But you're a line cook. I was a line cook, 8 years ago, when I was learning the business from the ground up instead of sitting in a classroom studying theory. I slung my purse over my shoulder. Since then, I've been rather busy building an empire. Giuseppe stood up, extending his hand one final time. Alexandra, it has been a pleasure doing business with you. I look forward to watching you transform my restaurants. Thank you, Giuseppe. I'll take good care of them. As he walked away, my family slowly approached the table, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Alexandra, Dad said quietly, we need to talk about this. Do we? Because 20 minutes ago you told me I was wasting my life. You said I needed to grow up and join the real world. You left me here alone because you thought I needed to learn a lesson about responsibility. We didn't know, Mom whispered. Didn't know what? That I might actually be successful? That I might have built something meaningful? Or didn't know because you never bothered to ask? Marcus cleared his throat. Alex, how long have you been? I mean, when did you start owning restaurants? I bought my first restaurant 3 years ago. A small Italian place that was about to close. I renovated it, rebuilt the menu, and turned it into the most popular spot in Little Italy. 3 years ago? Victoria's voice was hollow. But we've been treating you like a failure. like someone who needed your pity and your intervention. I looked around the table at their stunned faces. Do you know what the hardest part was? Not building the business. That was actually fun. The hardest part was listening to my own family tell me I was worthless while I was succeeding beyond anything any of you have accomplished. Dad sank into his chair. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to see who you really were. I wanted to know if you'd love and support me even when you thought I had nothing to offer you. And? Mom asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. And I learned that your love is conditional. When you thought I was poor, you pitied me. When you thought I was struggling, you looked down on me. Tonight, when you thought abandoning me at dinner would teach me a lesson, you did it without hesitation. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities. But now that you know I'm wealthy, I continued, suddenly you want to talk. Suddenly you're interested in my life. Suddenly I'm worth your time. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That's not fair. Isn't it? 5 minutes ago you were offering me a job as a paralegal because you thought I needed saving. Now you're probably wondering if I might invest in your law firm. His face reddened, confirming my suspicion. Alexandra, Dad tried again. We're sorry. We made assumptions. We were wrong. Yes, you were. But the damage is done. I stood up. I spent 8 years building something incredible while my own family told me I was failing. Do you have any idea how that feels? We can fix this, Mom said desperately. We can start over. I looked at each of them in turn, Dad with his deflated authority, Mom with her desperate need to repair things, Marcus with his wounded pride, and Victoria with her calculating expression as she probably tried to figure out how to benefit from this revelation. You know what? You're right. We can start over. I pulled out my phone. Hi, James. It's Alexandra. Could you bring the car around to Bella Vista? Yes, I'm ready to leave. Who's James? Victoria asked. My driver. I don't actually need to find my own way home. I haven't taken public transportation in 3 years. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the restaurant's entrance within minutes. Through the window I could see James getting out to open the passenger door. That's my ride, I said, gathering my things. Wait, Dad called out. What happens now? Where do we go from here? I paused at the table, looking down at the 4 people who had raised me, shaped me, and ultimately underestimated me so completely that they'd driven me away from their lives. Now you figure out how to live with the fact that you abandoned your daughter at the moment of her greatest triumph. You left me here tonight thinking you were teaching me a lesson about failure. Instead, you taught me a lesson about who my real family is. We are your real family, Mom protested. Real family celebrates your successes. Real family asks about your dreams. Real family doesn't leave you alone in a restaurant because they're embarrassed by your life choices. I headed toward the door. Giuseppe's staff has been more supportive of my career than any of you have ever been. James held the car door open as I approached. Good evening, Miss Chin. How did the meeting go? Very well, James. Giuseppe's restaurants are officially part of our group now. Congratulations, miss. Shall we head to Il Giardino to share the news with the team? Perfect idea. As I settled into the leather seats of my Mercedes, I could see my family through the restaurant windows, still standing around the table where I'd just signed the biggest deal of my career. They looked lost, confused, and for the first time in years they looked small. My phone buzzed with a text from Giuseppe. Thank you for choosing Bella Vista for tonight's revelation. Your family's reaction was educational. Welcome to the family business, my dear. I smiled and typed back. Thank you for everything, Giuseppe. See you Monday to start the transition. As James pulled away from the restaurant, I watched my family's figures grow smaller in the distance. Part of me felt sad for them. They'd missed out on years of celebration, pride, and shared joy because they couldn't see past their own expectations. But mostly I felt free. Free from the weight of their disappointment. Free from their limiting beliefs about my potential. Free from the need to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their respect. Tomorrow I would start integrating Giuseppe's restaurants into my growing empire. I would continue building something meaningful, something that brought joy to thousands of people every week. I would keep pursuing my passion, surrounded by people who believed in my vision. And if my family wanted to be part of that journey, they would have to earn their way back in. Not as people who tolerated my choices, but as people who celebrated them. Not as family members who loved me despite my career, but as family members who loved me because of who I had become. The city lights blurred past the car windows as we drove toward Il Giardino, where my real family, my chosen family of chefs, servers, managers and friends, would be waiting to hear about the expansion. They would cheer for my success, ask thoughtful questions about my plans, and probably insist on opening a bottle of champagne to celebrate. They would do what real family does. They would be proud of me. And for the first time in 8 years that felt like enough. As we pulled up to Il Giardino, I could see the warm lights spilling from the windows, could hear the faint sounds of laughter and conversation from the kitchen. My kitchen. My restaurant. My family. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the door, leaving behind the people who had tried to make me smaller and walking toward the people who helped me grow larger. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. Sometimes it's simply proving yourself right and letting them live with the consequences of their choices. And sometimes, just sometimes, the family you choose is so much better than the family you're born with that you wonder why it took you so long to realize the difference. The door chimed as I entered Il Giardino, and my staff looked up with genuine smiles of welcome. Not because they knew I was wealthy, not because they wanted something from me, but simply because they were happy to see me. That's what real family looks like. And I was finally home.